send it to you.
Okay, you're not recording us now, right?
You got it.
It is 10 minutes after 7. We'll start with our public hearing tonight, the Planning Commission meeting on June 15th, 2022. We will open with our public hearing. The purpose of the public hearing is to hear public comment on the proposed development agreement which the city is having with Summit Creek. I've received no written comments. We'll only take comments from those present who choose to make comment for the development agreement. So with that, we'll open it up. Are there any present here who wish to make any comment regarding development agreement? It's been online for several weeks for people to view and look at and review it. It's been in the works for probably over 6 months, developing and putting it together between the city and Summit Creek. Just briefly, I guess this agreement would go forward and govern the remainder, well, for the next 10 years, the continued development at Summit Creek, and the agreement is renewable as it's agreeable to both parties after that period of time as well to go forward. So, any present who wish to make a comment? Okay. The time is 12 minutes after 7 by my clock. We will close the public hearing on the development agreement, and we'll go into our regularly scheduled planning commission meeting. Ted, would you lead us in the pledge? And John, would you offer invocation for us? We invite you to join with us who are here.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our dear Father in heaven, we are grateful this beautiful day for this opportunity we have to be gathered here and be able to conduct business on behalf of the city and residents of Woodland Hills. We're grateful for this beautiful place in which we live and for the nature that surrounds us and all that we're able to enjoy. This time now we pray that we may be able to conduct the business that's before us in a manner that is pleasing unto Thee and that is becoming for those that live in this area. We're grateful for the opportunity we have to be involved as public servants and ask Thee now to help us to be mindful of that as we conduct this business this evening. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you. I'd like to mention that Commissioner Seven Johnson is excused tonight. He's out of town and should be with us our next meeting. We have our alternate, John Wallace, sitting in, be participating in our discussion and any voting tonight. So, next item is public comment. I've invited Kirk Richards to, he wants to extend, he has a temporary business license right now with a business that's partly operating out of his home and other places as well. Kirk, if you'd come up and just have a chair right there in front and tell us a little bit about the business.
This chair right here?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, I'm an artist. I make oil paintings, sculptures. I have a few part-time assistants. Usually they are either in a program at BYU or UVU or have just recently finished. And so yeah, we sell art. I do it from my studio in the basement of our home and sometimes in the garage. We also participate in what this year became kind of a community art studio tour where the public was invited to visit the studios of various artists. So I guess the reason that I need to be here and some of the other artists don't is that I have employees that we pay to work in the home. That's actually gone down a little bit from like pre-pandemic era because I have since bought a gallery and a school space where I do a lot of the artwork in Provo. So we have maybe, I have 2 assistants coming to the house right now, just on their own schedules, their own timing, and so usually there's one person, sometimes there are 2 people that working at the same time, but that would be probably like 1 day a week. And that's it. Do you have any questions for me?
So I have another, similar to you, that's a neighbor of mine that, I know she's got some interns over there. So I guess my question is how often do we make you come in and do this? Is it annual?
I think it is annual.
Is there,
It's an annual renewal for them. And it's a conditional use permit,
okay, that's why. All right.
so,
Okay.
yeah. We will make a recommendation to city council. City council is ultimately approval of it. So, to my knowledge, they've never denied it.
Is there a way to make this so he doesn't have to come back every year, maybe a longer time frame, or I'm just, we haven't talked, okay?
No.
I'm just looking at this and thinking, he could, his time could be better spent.
With
Thanks.
the first time, we like to have the person come in. With annual renewals, not so much, if there haven't been any changes or things like that with it.
But it's an annual renewal, it's not,
Yeah,
I mean, you could,
And
you go ahead.
We would have to change the code,
so because it's a conditional use is why.
and the code requires.
And the
it
conditional use is because he has 1 or 2 people there that he pays.
Because he has the employees.
I think the first time I did it, we had probably 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And Chief or
Correct.
Craig came over and walked through and made some recommendations. So anyway, I haven't heard anything about him coming through again, but maybe a review every 3 years or something might be.
I just wondering what the protocol is.
So they have to renew the conditional use permit annually. Is that the case for every conditional use permit, or just those that have employees or a
anyway.
business?
And conditional use.
Rose told me that she didn't have to do it because she doesn't have employees.
They're interns.
I don't want to rat
No,
Rose
no.
out.
Well, that's what.
She has
They're-
interns.
Yeah,
Some of the
and
communities
I know that, she does by me and I understand.
We get conditional use permits on occasion in communities for example, like in Saratoga, right? We build a pump station in a residential community. So we had to get a conditional use permit because it's not permitted, but it's conditional use to have a pump station in a residential community. But it was a
So
long
what
time
happens
deal.
if they don't renew that every year?
Well, they don't. That's why I'm wondering if it applied to, because there are no employees. I mean, I guess there are maintenance people who go out there once a day or whatever, but.
It would all depend on the ordinance in the city.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
Maybe
why I'm wondering if, is it.
For example, ours is a yearly renewal. It could be changed.
yeah.
Ordinance
No,
could
I
be
was
changed.
just wondering, cause,
So, depending on the criteria of
Yeah,
of
This is
that.
the council that makes
so
the
are we looking for a motion?
that's why I was wondering is if there was something specific to our city, a reason why we do it annually.
Let me ask you.
How many conditional use permits are there out there, Jody-ish? 1, 2, 10, 20, 40 in the city?
Depends how honest people are when they fill out their application.
Known.
So just Kurt,
How many known?
2.
Appreciate your honesty, Kurt.
Two.
Yeah, I guarantee there's more people
Yeah.
working in the city.
Have you talked to your neighbors about this? Oftentimes, we take concerns from neighbors, if you've got a kindergarten that somebody's running and people parking up and down the street all the time and having problems that way.
Yes, I didn't do it this year, but in the past, I think, I don't know if you remember, but I just was like, we're gonna have this event, which was the annual studio tour. And I also talked to, because I talked to my neighbors when we were leading up to this conditional use the first time, and just told them kind of who was in front of our house or whatever. So yes, I have some new neighbors that I haven't talked to, but I certainly could.
I mean, living there by as a plow driver, there are a lot of other areas in this city that have people parking on streets that concern me, and his is not one of them.
And I'll be honest, we've never received a complaint, anything. I mean,
Is there a fee associated with the annual review?
There is, it's an
There
annual
is.
fee.
Yeah, I mean, most building permits have an annual fee, right? I mean, it's,
it's $107.
yeah, it's pretty, that's pretty consistent anywhere, so.
And
So we're just making a recommendation to the council to continue the conditional use permit, is that what we're looking for?
We would if we're through asking questions and things, if anybody else has any questions of Kurt.
we also don't have neighbors right next to us. We have a retention basin.
It's pretty permanent.
Yeah. Thanks for the reminder.
And the city is partly on our, like that basin takes part of our yard, so.
Yeah, that's a whole different conversation here to have.
I just wanna, there may never come anything from this, but I talked with, the manager way back then about parking in exchange for
Yes, I
that
think I
section.
remember hearing that conversation.
And I don't think anything's ever gonna, we're not ever gonna get anything out of that unless it someday if we build a studio to the side, it might go a little bit beyond the standard
Is that bad?
set, to the side, which I talked to city officials about. But again, I don't know if that'll ever happen. I'm trying to kind of move things to Provo where, there's just more possibility of doing larger events and things like that. But
Just a studio in Redmond?
I still have a studio in Redmond yet.
How was the
Just come
show
on, Liz.
that they did here? What was your feeling about it?
I thought it was great. Everybody I talked to loved it.
Yeah,
And
living on the street or two of them there, it was 3 busy nights. It didn't bother me because I knew it was temporary. I thought it was exciting to see.
I loved it. I went around and thought it was great.
And people that are going to see artwork in studios generally aren't,
They're not around.
causing a fuss or
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
So I think there was quite a few people that were in the city that attended because it was a community event and they liked it.
But back to the branding stuff earlier, Dick?
Yeah,
This
you
is a positive.
came to mind. I don't know if you were here for that, you probably weren't, but we had a presentation on land use issues and talked about branding a community. And I thought of, all the artists that we have here, and maybe that's something to consider, look at down the road.
Yeah.
So, thanks to all of you. Any other questions? Okay, we'll take a motion.
I make a motion that we approve
Recommend approval?
Kurt's conditional use, I'm sure there's an official name to it or something, for another period of time, whatever that is, with a suggestion that the council maybe look at some other options of a biannual or triannual renewal versus an annual.
You want that part of your motion, or do you
No,
want to talk
I
about
don't,
that separately?
let's make them separate. I make a motion that we approve the land use, or the conditional use as submitted.
Okay.
Extension.
Is there a second? Okay, Larry, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good.
Just
Good. Thanks for coming down.
Thank you for your
We'll,
time.
move that forward to the city council then,
Great.
so.
Thank you.
Wait to hear from Jody to see if they want you here or not, to consider that.
Is that tonight?
No,
No,
That'll be 28, week or two, yeah.
so
Thank you.
we'll be in touch with you.
All right.
Thank you. So do we not
have business licenses in the city?
Yes, we do. Right? How many business licenses are there? A couple dozen?
People aren't,
Not that many?
But some are
Sent out
covered by
reminders,
conditional
but-
use permit and some are not.
If they have employees now.
They're not, you can't get a business license if you have employees?
No, you
Okay.
can't.
It costs more.
It's just usually an occupational or conditional use, where Mr. Richard's wife had filled it out with, I think, 4 or 5 employees. I remember Marcy taking it, and that's kind of where it dropped, and so,
Okay.
he's had one before, I think this one expired, it was trying to get one quickly in order to be in compliance with the art show that was going on, but several of those artists don't have ones in the cities.
Are they selling out of their home?
I don't know,
Because if they're not selling out of their home, they
Yeah, if
can't
it was
sell a
just-
business.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
they're just
I
drawing
have-
or painting, then anybody can do that.
yeah. We'll
Okay.
probably need to put another push in the newsletter for those who operate businesses.
Good
out
to
of-
remind people every now and then. That's there.
Well, especially if you remind them that it's only $117, right?
Well, and the normal business license is 25, yeah,
So it's,
so, yeah.
It's a normal business license, we don't see. The city issues
No,
that.
they write that and it's just done.
Yeah, so.
Yes, and you can operate it, so.
Next item on the agenda is approval of the May 18 Planning Commission minutes. I sent those out to everybody. I didn't get any feedback of errors or changes that I made. So if there are any questions on it, I'll take a motion on the May 18, 2022 minutes.
Move to approve the minutes.
Okay, Ted, a motion to approve them. Is there a second?
I guess.
Okay.
Sorry,
Larry, second.
can I make the motion since I wasn't here? I did review them.
Yes, no reason you can't. Okay, all in favor of approving them? Aye. Any opposed? Very well, thank you. Proposed, item 6, proposed changes to the city fencing ordinance. Okay. We're back to the fencing ordinance. That's Ted to kind of do some looking and reviewing at verbiage that would accommodate the clear vision area or vision triangle, whatever you want to call it.
So based on the prior discussion we had with the prior entity, is this done in plain language?
An illustrative, I'll show you,
It's kind of
illustrative.
still a work in process, but we want to talk to everybody about it and see if we're on the right track.
For us that are not engineers?
I'm gonna pass out a few documents here,
Okay,
we
yeah.
can talk through what you and I talked about.
Okay?
Just so you can see illustratively what we're talking about.
That's what Mike Hanson said to do, so.
What's that?
That's what Mike Hanson said to do.
Well, I'm gonna, listen, one thing you learn when
Pictures
you,
with the mouse board.
when you do all kinds of engineering documents, the most valuable one you do is the drawing. About half your specifications ever get read, I don't even understand half of them we do. But drawings clearly show what the contractor needs to do. I'll be, you want one, David, just so you can be compared to the council meeting?
Yeah.
Here it is. So, I'm gonna just tell you what I did here real quick and then I'll talk through a few different things, so. Maybe one copy too short, but 10 of these. All right, so that 8.5 by 11 sheet, well, let's step back for a minute. So right now, currently our development standards for defining the clear area on a corner say well, in short, you take the two right-of-way lines of the road, which is common to the property line, right? So the right-of-way line and the property line are a common line, and you go 35 feet each direction and draw a triangle.
So you're talking city right away.
So you're talking city right away.
So the asphalt land's here, but the right of way is gonna be beyond that.
Exactly, which is
It
typically
won't
where
go to
the,
the property line, so the property line is kind of that.
The property line, the end of the right of way is the beginning of the property
Right.
line, vice versa,
Should be.
yes.
so, and we'll start, so typically what we're talking about in this case is probably something that rarely happens, because we have other requirements that dictate setbacks for houses in front yards and how far a fence has to be back that way. So most of the time, when you would see a site triangle apply, would be when you have a rear yard and a side yard abutting the street. If it's a front yard abutting either street, there are other regulations that will apply there. Like you have to have your fence, set back to the house frontage or whatever, and your house has to be set back so far. This would mostly apply when you have a rear yard and a side yard. So if you look at, there's a line there where the right-of-way line, the road right-of-way line and the property line are a common line. Our current standard says you take from the apex of the point at the corner, you have to read, it reads about the in our codes or our standards, it reads about the tangential line, but, which is one of those that's probably not plain language, that maybe I can
If you
correct
can't
a little
pronounce
bit.
it, we're not gonna use it.
Lori knows it.
But basically what that means is if your right-of-way line does this, if it's a half circle,
With
you
radius,
draw a straight line, and the straight line and where that apex is, that's where you start your measure.
okay, you don't deal with the radius,
Don't
so
build
then you go to
radius,
this, okay.
which is in short what it means. You take that point and you measure back 35 feet along the property line each direction, and then you draw a line that creates the triangle. You can't build anything in that triangle. That's the blue triangle you'll see on that 8.5 by 11. I just took a development plan we have in one of the developments down there and uses to do my example. So if you look at that 11 by 17 sheet and you see that blue triangle on there, that's what I've done with that one. That's what our current development standard says to do. If you go to AASHTO, which is the American Association of State Transportation Officials, and they are kind of the regulating body for doing transportation-related design. And what most cities, they talk about is using a site triangle. You develop a site triangle that creates your point of where you have to keep that clear vision. What a site triangle is it's basically when someone is stopped at an intersection and they need to look at traffic that's coming this way down the road, they have to be able to see clearly so far so that they can safely pull out without the person having to stop, or if they need to, they have the ability to react and stop. Right? That's kind of how you develop a site triangle. So it's based on basically speed limit of the road and where the stop sign or stop bar is located, or the imaginary stop line if there's not one at the intersection. And so if you look at that 8.5 by 11 sheet, that's a calculation of a site triangle. And we have 3 speed limits in the town. Right? We have 25, 30, 35. And basically what you do is you take a point where that person is stopped, you go out to the lane, you go draw a straight line up to the lane where traffic will be coming down the perpendicular road. You measure up that lane a certain distance depending on the speed limit, and then you draw that triangle. That's your sight distance triangle. That's all based on braking time and reaction time and all that kind of stuff. Allow a person to stop. And so you have to have a clear vision in that triangle. That's how AASHTO does it. And that's how most, when they talk about site triangle, that's what it refers to. So if you look at that 11 by 17, I mean so the 8.5 by 11 is the calculation of a site triangle based on AASHTO. If you look at that 11 by 17, that red triangle is a site triangle. That's calculated based on the AASHTO method of calculating site triangles. So I guess kind of the topic is if you look at those 2 triangles, the blue one, which is our current standard, is going to be we're probably going to be worst case. In other words, if you calculate a site triangle based on AASHTO, you may or may not impact that person's property. It could depend on the speed limit, it could depend on how far back the right-of-way line is versus the property line. There are certain factors that may or may not mean they're going to have to leave that portion of their property open. With the blue triangle, which is our current standard, it's always going to be impacting their property. because it's measured along their property line, 35 feet each direction. How that 35 feet was come up with, no clue. It seems a little bit arbitrary. I don't know how it was come up with in our code. I've never come across that before where they've just given a distance. It's usually a calculated site triangle, based on, like I said, the speed limit. So I don't know how we got 35 feet in our code. I don't know any of the history there, but our current standard, way it's written, will always impact that person's property. They'll always have, and
Now, you can see if you take this whole red triangle, it just covers a little bit of the corner there, which overlaps the blue. Just a very small portion, maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 feet on one side and maybe 5 feet on the other. That's the extent of that red triangle covering that property there that's formed on that triangle.
But that is, so I'm looking at the red-blue one here, the 11 by 17.
blue bad, red good.
Yeah, but what I'm looking at is I see city right away and then I see property line.
Yeah, you'll see the
Yes.
dark line is the road right away
Yeah.
common to the property line.
Yes. Because what people need to understand is, I mean, you've got a couple different situations here. You've got, I don't know how to kind of, you've got the Four Seasons development, for instance. It's a little bit more of a traditional neighborhood, where setbacks are not going to be as extensive beyond the paved or the improved area as it is, say, in this section.
Now, Four Seasons has its own fencing ordinance.
Correct.
It's not part of this.
Okay, this is the non-Four Season.
Correct.
Okay, so can I open up Pandora's box?
Sure, that's what we're here to do.
Dave's gonna listen to this too, so. Pick any intersection here, go to the city right away. We've got vegetation growing within the city right away. Let alone a clear vision triangle beyond any city right aways. Do you follow me? And this is, as I drive plowing, that's a concern in every intersection here throughout the winter. As I drive fire apparatus, as I drive to the fire station or whatever. For instance, I come down Loafer, and right there, Woodland Hills Drive kind of goes up around that blind corner. I can come to a complete stop, look, pull out. By the time I'm pulling out, I've got a car on everywhere in there. So as we're talking about this triangle here, as it impacts fencing and et cetera, you've got a domino effect. All these intersections here are encroached upon in the right of way, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. So they're all a safety hazard.
Yeah. Now, Lori, you had a question. I don't
Well,
know.
the yellow numbers are this length, right, the long,
Right.
Yes.
So if you look at that red triangle,
yeah,
see where it goes all the way towards the bottom of the page?
Mhm.
That's the yellow number,
okay.
based on speed.
Now, one thing to keep in mind is the front setback. We have, some places we have 30, some places we have 50. So despite that, we have trees and vegetation growing in those setbacks.
Which is fine, yeah.
So they're going to impact the view regardless of any fencing ordinance that we have. So, just a comment to follow up with your thoughts and concerns. Yeah, so they're valid. But the fencing ordinance in and of itself, in most instances, as Ted said, won't have an adverse impact on this clear vision triangle because of the normal setbacks.
Correct.
Only when you've got a side or backyard that come together at the intersection.
Correct.
So I don't know how many of those would have in the city. Generally, a developer does not design lots to have the side and back yards at the corner. They're set away from
See
the
that across from John.
corner of an intersection.
So unless you live just downhill from John.
Do you have one like that?
Then that guy below him, his backyard, that's a long loafer. His front door faces.
Oh, yeah, unless you turn the house backwards, upside down, and inside out, and don't build it, yeah.
Yeah, And that's.
Then front yards become backyards and inside becomes outside and all that stuff, yeah, that's a whole different situation.
Yeah.
And this really is consideration of the fencing ordinance, right?
Yes.
So vegetation.
Yeah, my concern is as you apply this to the fencing ordinance with the site plan, it could impact potentially some vegetation situations as far as if you're gonna implement the site plan, then it's gonna impact potentially anything. not
By
just
the way, I
fencing.
did not tell Mike this was on the agenda tonight. That was completely arbitrary. He brought that up in his discussion.
But I guess my thought is, we've got a couple of alternatives that we potentially could use.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from Ted is the 35 should cover any of these speed limit options with room to spare.
Yeah.
So
Now,
the question is do you leave that, or do you
go with the site plan.
simplify it to this, well, I should say, do you incorporate this knowing that it would give more latitude in that requirement?
And honestly, I don't have a bias either way.
I don't-
It's just
I
trying
don't-
to represent, other than, I think you're more defensible by going with the site triangle versus arbitrary measurements off down the property line. But, kinda like Mike said, if the city sets its code,
Thoughts, other thoughts?
So is the council looking for some specific direction on this from us?
Don't talk to Dave, because he doesn't like fences at all.
And up here, I'm not a fence fan either. That's part of the beauty here. Okay.
I should say, I'm not really either.
Yeah,
But at some point, you gotta have a way to regulate.
But yes, you have to have some
People do
there
for
because
safety
they're,
purposes.
The question is, if we go to the council and they say, we don't like either of these, we're not for it, then it's over and done with,
Yeah.
you know? So,
For me, this would be more of a safety issue. Of general public more so than a fencing restriction, I guess. I don't know.
And that's just what these are
And-
for, is to create a safe.
Actually, that might be a good approach, is separate out this idea from the fence idea.
The public safety issue.
So just say,
the
You
fence
cannot build-
accommodates the safetiness of
No,
an
no, no.
intersection.
I would just say, if your home or if your property is on the intersection, you can't build anything within the site triangle.
And that's what, a lot of.
Whether it's a
do.
fence, a hut, or whatever, you
Yeah,
can't put a
Tree,
flagpole there,
yeah.
you can't do anything.
And 95% of the time, they won't, because that's the setback.
Yeah.
So they could put a, flagpole, or I think they're prohibited from putting an accessory building out in front of the
Because
place.
of setbacks, yeah.
But, anyway,
I thought you were going to say that they, 95% of the time, they wouldn't put anything there because the snowplow would hit it. But,
The heavy wet snows that we had recently,
the snow's hitting and stuff.
just the plow pushing the snow, that stuff is wicked.
Yeah.
It's just heavy and dangerous, yeah. So you're right. The soft, fluffy, powdery stuff you have in the middle of it, no big deal.
Any other comments or thoughts? We'd still need to structure some clear verbiage
With the graphic.
as depicted in the graphic.
I think if you could keep it to one paragraph, maybe two, with some type of a drawing, and have it all on one page, and not beyond, and just simplify it,
I
yeah.
wonder, kind of going back to Dave's idea, is this something that gets applied to more than just fencing ordinance, and then the fencing ordinance references it as not being able to build
In the site triangle,
inside triangle?
the site
But
triangle
it also applies to
all things,
the whole, everything.
yeah.
So it gets, kind of be its own little thing, but then the fencing ordinance refers to it.
I wonder, I have to look at the development and construction standard again to see how widely that's applied, to see if that applies in any corner lot, that you have to have that area that's preserved.
Like, when I was in, I think it was Riverton, they had a similar type ordinance, only you couldn't put shrubs over 3 feet tall in that site triangle. I mean, it was more than just fence, you could,
No
in there, you could do a
objections.
fence all the way to the right-of-way line, to the front of the house, but it had to, once you passed the frontage of the house, it had to drop to 3
Drop
feet.
down.
But then you couldn't put anything over 3 feet tall
Under 3 feet.
In the
that-
side triangle, right?
in the site triangle. Anything that was over 3 feet, and there's a reason for that, when they calculate these site triangles, they assume that a person's eye level, or sitting in a car,
Is,
is roughly that level. So if it's under 3 feet, then in theory, the person can see over it.
Here's a standard in the development construction standards. It says no fence, wall, structure, planting, or topographic or grading arrangement shall be erected or established on any corner lot which will obstruct the view of a driver of a vehicle approaching the intersection, period. The unobstructed corner shall mean a triangular area formed by the street property lines and a line connecting them at points 35 feet from the intersection of the street lines, or in the case of a rounded property corner, from the intersection of the street lines produced along the subtangents of the curve to said point of intersection. Existing vegetation not in conflict with the wildland interface ordinance of Woodland Hills or other ordinances regulating removal of vegetation need not be removed unless the planning commission determines that a hazard exists. So it
That
seems
was
like
my
it's
question,
covered in
yeah.
there.
go back to, it was referencing the road, how did that word it again?
With rounded,
No, the street, go up higher than that.
okay, it says, no fence, wall, structure, planting, or topographic or grading arrangement shall be erected or established on any corner lot which will obstruct the view of a driver of a vehicle approaching the intersection. Then it defines, it says the unobstructed corner shall mean a triangular area formed by the street property lines.
Stop right there.
Street
What's a
right-of-way
street
line.
property line?
Street right-of-way line, that's gonna be changed to right-of-way.
What's a street property line?
It's the right of way.
Okay, so that needs to be changed. Cause when you tell me a street property line, I don't know what you're talking about.
The other thing that's confusing to me, Wayne,
Yes.
why is this in our development construction standards? This applies
Sure,
to
this
the
applies to,
development
yeah.
of a lot,
This should be in the,
not the development of a subdivision.
Yeah, this would be individual lot.
This is talking about streets. In
No,
general.
it's talking
So
about
the
the
other parts,
development within,
well, that could apply to a developer though.
They could put a pole or light or
I mean, he could, so, you know, we
something.
maybe need it,
the developer
Both
needs
places?
to have an intersection that agrees with this definition as
Yes.
far as
But
the
that
vision goes.
that would also apply to the homeowner
The whole
as
thing
well,
too is
after the fact.
as well.
but I think
It's
it
one of those,
I get it, but I think it needs to, maybe the same concept with different ideas in each area. Meaning, you're talking about a fence, well, how many subdivision developers are gonna put in a fence? Not many. So we shouldn't mention fence here, we should over in the building and construction standards.
but maybe in the fencing ordinance, we reference that it must comply with this clear vision area under 2.3.10 of the development and construction standards. Reference it, not repeat it, but use this as a reference in,
And if that's the case, my preference would be that we have the original text somewhere in the ordinances, not in the development construction standard, and have the development construction standards
Refer back to it.
refer to that other text
in the ordinance.
Just
in the
switch it.
ordinance. See, the ordinances should not refer to the development, it should be the other way around. Development construction standards should refer to the ordinances. In all cases.
Which is in a hierarchy
Yeah.
of things. Your development
Yeah.
construction standards fall under your ordinance in the hierarchy.
So back to the question, redefine the right-of-way property line, and then the question is the 35-35, right? Which is the blue one here.
That's the blue one
I
there.
don't know that blue is bad, blue just is.
Depends on what you're talking,
For blue?
triangles or schools. The only thing about, and like I said, I don't really have a bias either way. I just don't know where the 35 came from or how. I guess the engineering side of me is every time I do something in our engineering world, we always make sure that we've got some science behind it to make it defensible.
Or at least a reference to know where it came from or why it came from.
Yeah, the 35-35 is certainly more stringent and in theory, well, in that case it's more stringent. I don't know if it would be in every case. Likely it would because you're starting your measurement at the property line. I think the pushback would come from a property owner that says, wait a minute, you're taking out all this property when it's not affecting the vision of the person. Why? You know, and then they somewhat of a battle on it. I don't know that we would have the science behind it to back why we came up with that 35.
I know what you're saying, Dave. Where we're taking part of this, I mean, there's 2 or 3 pages here in our development and construction standards talking about streets, curves and dead-end streets and half streets and street intersections, street grades, street curves, which basically all drives the infrastructure and the subdivision
Yeah,
development
that makes perfect sense to me.
process. And this is part of that. That's,
But it's kind of not.
well, it's
I think
it's more, there's a greater application than just in here.
When we're talking about the site triangle, I'm just trying to be real. I highly doubt we would ever have a subdivision developer who would put something within that site triangle. Now, it's possible. I mean,
A
you can get
monument,
weird cases.
But I'm assuming there's some guidance on that.
Yeah, you could
right?
get away with some, so that's fair. Maybe what we do is in the development construction standards, we just have a simple sentence that says, you cannot construct anything that on a corner that
Higher than
violates
30.
the site triangle. Just some simple text like that, that's all you need there. But the more common case that I can see happening is where a homeowner who's building a home wants to put something in that site triangle. So handle the common case in the ordinances, not in the development construction standards. That seems more logical to me.
No, and I don't disagree. I'm just trying to sort through it all.
And David, going back to the guy that was here earlier, Mike, the state code may already have it, the site triangle and all that kind of language for the developer anyway.
That could be the case. I mean, it might, well, maybe part of the IBC codes. I don't know if it is, but.
I don't think it'd be part of the IBC, but it may be part of, like, for example, whenever we design streets, we follow what they call AASHTO, which is the American Association of State Transportation Officials. That's what most communities, including UDOT, have adopted as these design guidelines. And so an AASHTO defines the site triangle. And so that's what we use when we design streets in cities or developments or stuff like that, was AASHTO guidelines. So most times your engineers that are designing for developers, cities, or whatever, are following those guidelines already. Because, yeah, and I agree, it's usually the homeowner that doesn't realize that until they read it, that they're, what site triangle even exists. Most engineers that work with developers do, or should.
Let me craft some language and send it to our attorneys, because this is something that they're concerned with as well, where we get these mixed up a little bit with development, construction,
Try and simplify it.
ordinances and whatnot. I like the thought of just putting a simple statement in there about keeping that area clear, but having the bulk of this then over into our, maybe it needs to be a separate, not part of our fencing ordinance, but referred to in our fencing ordinance to put this in some kind of its own section in our Title 10 ordinances.
Look, I think David had a point earlier, maybe it was somebody else. What happens if you plant a pine tree that's 40 feet tall and 20 feet wide in the triangle? It has nothing to do with the fence, right? You're losing the health, safety, welfare concept by putting anything in that triangle that's over there.
Yeah, I'm kind of agree. I think site triangle is gonna be definition in an ordinance, and then maybe our
Refer to
construction
it.
standards refer to
Refer
it,
to
our
it as
fencing
needed.
ordinance refers to it.
Yeah.
So you've got one spot talking about it, but then we refer to it.
Then where it applies, refer back.
Where, yeah, where it applies.
Okay.
So you just have site distance triangle, here's the definition, and then these 2, 3, 4 areas refer back to it. Yeah.
Okay, I'll do some work on that then and put something together on it. With the thoughts that we've all expressed here. Okay,
Now, I guess the question I still have is,
yes,
are we doing the 35 feet as currently defined, or are we using the Astro method of calculating the site triangle?
I think that's just gonna get confusing. My suggestion would be to use the 35 feet, the blue triangle kind of thing. Otherwise, we're gonna get lost in the weeds on it. We just don't, this is it. It's excessive, understand, to the circumstance.
So let me throw, okay, you're saying this doesn't apply to Four Seasons, all right?
Correct.
We're talking, so let's say Thousand Oaks, you have a 30-foot side yard setback on a corner lot, so 30 front, 30 side. If you're going back 35 feet, but the plane of that house is at 30, you're saying that fence has to be at least at the edge of that property line, it's gonna have to go back another 5
Another
feet
5 feet.
versus the setback of the house at 30.
It's a good point.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, is it consistent when you get into these, and I think that's why a lot of them use this triangle, because if we get into points where we're gonna have much smaller lots, say like eventually where zoning changes down to Lauderdale or something, we're getting, these much smaller lots, I think that 35 feet's gonna start,
It's really.
gonna come straight right into the corner of people's houses and stuff like that.
You think we would be good using 30 instead of?
Well, it's back to data substantiation, I can't even spit it out, on it.
And I think for that site triangle, we could get a really simple table.
Yeah, if there's a way to,
Just, we got 3 speed
if
limits.
there's a way to dumb this down, yeah.
I think if we start, because speed limits are gonna change, and change throughout the city, and so I think, I think we need to just pick a
Well-
number that we're comfortable with and use.
Yeah, I mean, if you got 25, 30, and 35, right now, we don't have anything over 35 in the city. If you took that as your worst case scenario, and
Mhm.
your red one here, what was that one based on?
I actually
It's
like
based
the
on 35.
formula table.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Mostly we work with, they do the site triangle calculation,
Why is that, Dave?
because it has a science behind it.
Because if we do change the speed limits,
It applies.
it.
You can apply
the
this to-
formula always works.
Yeah, but you can apply this to
You don't,
anything.
you don't have to arbitrarily say, okay, 25 feet back. Well, what does that mean? 25 feet back may mean, I don't know, that's what it is today, but let's, all right,
Well,
I don't dare say this, so, let's say we change the speed limit on Woodland Hills Drive to 50 miles an hour. Well, then all
We're
of a
talking hypothetical, right?
It's not already-
Just so everybody that listens to this in the future,
more
this is
people
just a
would be in
hypothetical.
compliance with the law right now.
More, not all.
So if that were to happen, which it won't, but if, then having the formula table it just changes your calculation, it doesn't invalidate the ordinance.
And my just kind of philosophy is, I always engineer things as though I'm gonna end up in court defending it. And if I arbitrarily pick something,
You gotta have something to back.
if I don't have any backing for it, like, you know, in the formula, you've got the backing of AASHTO, who's done this scientifically based on braking distance, reaction time, all that kind of stuff. And if you went to court, you know, the courts would likely defend your formula.
So in the
If
ordinance,
you arbitrarily pick something, you're probably gonna lose.
in the ordinance, would you have a table though that would show different speed limits, or
You could.
would you just say?
So this is has different speed limits, it's stopping, it doesn't, is there another column that could be added here that says that's 20 feet in, that's 25 feet in, that's 30 feet or whatever?
Well-
But look at the distance.
It's,
It's maybe 5 feet and maybe 10 feet
Yeah, yeah.
for 35 miles an hour.
I see that based on the.
So
red
if
hood
it's
package.
slower, it's gonna be even less. You're gonna end up with hardly any triangle at all.
So let me throw
And
this out.
if we're going by the 35 feet in our development and construction standards setback, then we're saying something that's different than that.
So setbacks up in this area here for a front and a side corner lot situation, because that's usually what this is applying to.
Right.
We're looking at 30-foot frontages and 50-foot frontages, basically, right? And
Yes.
30-foot and 50-foot side yards, right?
So that's the setback.
Yes.
So you're saying, you say you have to, you can't put a fence 5 feet on one side and 10 feet on the other. It hardly seems it's worthwhile.
Well, so here's the question. So let's say we've got a corner lot that's 30 side and 30 front, okay?
Okay?
Regardless of the site triangle, the ordinance says you can't have the fence in front of the plane of the house, right? Because the landing did,
That's right.
so that by default already creates a 30-foot setback on the fence. Now, that doesn't apply to other stuff, you know, flagpoles, et cetera, but the fence problem solved by saying you can't bring a fence past the front plane of the house, right? Am I-
Yes.
Okay, so that was, and based on what I'm seeing for calculations here, if it's a 30-foot setback, 30-foot, that easily meets any of the site triangle calculations mathematically, right?
possible. Can't say it will have.
Are we gonna get
No,
people-
at these current speed limits,
Are we gonna get people confused
I just,
with the setback distance versus the speed limit?
no, we don't need to, so if we're saying a 35 to 35, but the house is a 30-foot setback, we create that problem already. That means they're gonna have to hold, at least out on that corner, they're gonna have to either diagonally go the fence or hold the entire fence back 35 feet, even though the house is at 30.
Yes. So do we just change it to 30 and leave it at that?
If that is
And knowing
our
that
least
some will be-
restrictive
Some will be
setback.
50,
Yeah, by default, regardless of the site triangle.
Correct.
Yeah, if they have a 50-foot front set, then the 50 foot's gonna apply to that fence line, yes, correct.
So, if we go with the 35, I'm just throwing out different things I'm thinking of. Say like we got 35 setback, say we change it to 30 foot, draw this triangle. They can put no, if it's the front of their house, you can put no flagpole there, put no tree there.
Well, two issues, we've got a fence situation and then we've got everything but a fence.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think
Well-
this is everything. I think the trees and plantings are a bigger issue than fences will be.
could be,
Potential.
Yeah,
especially give it time,
yeah.
tree grows and, you know.
Because this fencing ordinance, as it sits here, Wayne, fence does not extend forward from the front plane of the residence, so we know it's gonna be at least 30 feet right there,
Correct.
okay? So from a fencing perspective, it probably is that verbiage there solves it. Then you've got a clear vision, which is a whole other issue, which I don't even though I opened that Pandora box tonight, let's close it now. That's a whole other issue that would need to be at least thought about, so. But the
I still like
ordinance,
the idea of putting that clear vision
Oh, yeah,
part in our Title 10 somewhere.
yes, I agree there.
Do we not need to address it in the fencing ordinance?
I think this would be good to have somewhere, because it's science-based. Not sure how to package it, to be honest with you, but I definitely think it would be. But this may not be applicable very much to the fencing part of it, as much as it would to just be sight distance and clear triangle in general.
I don't see that applying a lot to fencing, just because we're not gonna have a lot of circumstances.
That's what I'm saying, and
I think that
based on the
would
data
be
here, a
setbacks.
minimum 30-foot setback meets this requirement and beyond.
I think most of the times the setbacks are gonna determine the fence.
Yes,
line.
yes.
This will just apply in cases where you have a rear or side yard, or apply to other things other than
Yeah,
fences.
yeah, now if you had a rear yard, for instance, if the subdivision had an interior street and the backyard was against this other street, which here is not common use, but doesn't mean it wouldn't be implemented somewhere else at some point. But that could be an issue there, yes, because then you've got a backyard fence and then they could run it up to the corner without the subdivision triangle in place. So probably needs to be in there.
Should that be with the clear vision rather than the fencing ordinance?
But it, well, if the fencing ordinance would refer back to the clear vision,
Mhm.
follow me? Because if you had a corner lot where the house was backyard, you know, for whatever reason, then that corner does become an issue, because they can put a tall fence up there.
Yeah, I would agree. It should go in an ordinance, and then the fencing standard refer to it.
Yeah.
Just in
But it
case.
still doesn't address natural vegetation, which is.
No, that's a whole nother conversation to have.
But I think that's why it's gotta be an ordinance, so then it can apply to other situations other than just a fence. So someone's not building big hedges along there,
Yeah.
6-foot high hedges.
It did allow, I think some of the verbiage was, is the natural stuff that's there could be left, so it'd just be adding,
Yeah.
you know.
To existing vegetation not in conflict with the wildland interface ordinance of Woodland Hills, which is a fire.
Yeah, that would fall into Craig's
Or
department.
other ordinances regulating removal of vegetation need not be removed unless planning commission determines that a hazard exists.
So that leaves an out to leave the native stuff as is unless it becomes
It's in
an issue. Yeah. And that would be more of the fire chief's prerogative.
So, suggestion is then to put this clear vision area over into Title 10 in its own section, applicable section somewhere.
And then refer to it as the.
Refer to it in the fencing ordinance. Use the diagram here in the clear vision statement. The red, we're talking about using the red calculations. They're not really applicable to the clear vision. They are a little bit. You see any issues with using that in the, because this is all based on miles per hour. You see any issues with that in the clear vision statement for a diagram?
This is good data to have. It'd be good to have it in there somewhere. I'm not quite sure where to package it or how to package it, but I think this would be good.
I guess I'm a little concerned with people understanding it.
Yes, I hear that.
That's why you show a picture,
What?
show the diagram, picture.
Yeah,
Like I said, pictures worth 1,000 words. And the more we've talked about it, I'm probably a little more a fan of using the Ashland methodology, just because it's got science behind it and more defensible. I mean, it's what we use in the engineering department, right? We have to-
Yeah, until you get a house that's the backyard's on that corner, probably won't be an issue, because of the front plane of the house is already at 30 or 50, or 30 or more, I should just say.
yeah.
People can choose to go further back if they want. So that, you can always be 30 feet, which I think meets the require of any of these speed limits.
Okay,
If you start developing or it's on a main road and they put the backyard, they're gonna have an interior road, then it's definitely apply.
okay, let me do some work on it, and then, let's not take a motion, let's firm things up a little bit more. With, where this new ordinance would be, and what the relationship with the fencing reference and so forth. So, okay. Everybody, not taking a motion, everybody proceeding along those lines? Alright. Next area, next thing for discussion is the development agreement. You've had a copy of it for quite a while. I sent it out, I think even before it went on the public website. As you had opportunity to look through it, look at it, are there any questions that you've got, or parts of it? We hope and expect it to be pretty much in a form it's in, finalized at that. We're not looking to tweak it here or there. If there's something that you feel that major that we missed or overlooked, or why isn't it there, let's talk about that. And there may be some questions that I can answer with some of that.
Yeah, I had a question. And I read through it, but I probably read a little quicker over all the legalese stuff. It talked about an exhibit in there for the improvements that will be completed in Plat B. Talked about how that exhibit be one in there. It shows the streets and what will happen on each street. That the developer will be responsible for. Did it talk about what those improvements, that's at the developer's expense, right, if I read that right?
Yes.
Those improvements. Did it talk about how the developer is getting made whole for those improvements?
The part related to that is if the city legally can require payments for that work to be done, the city will collect that money and reimburse the developer.
Give me an example.
For the individual lot, from the individual lot owners?
Yes, yes.
So where the developer owns a large portion of the lots,
That the developer will do that work and build that into the price of the lot that they sell.
and so then only the lots that are not
Private
owned by the
ownership.
developer then would pay the city, reimburse the city for the improvements.
If the city can legally collect the money from them, for example.
Yeah, that's my question, because I know the city collected a bond to have all that work done.
No, they didn't. They had a bond that was put in place to do some of the work, not all of the work.
The bond was not sufficient.
The bond was not sufficient.
So anything
but
that
they did
remains
accept
is
a-
bond
They
exhibit.
basically accepted a lot
So-
for the bond, right?
So- Yeah, so.
Which is not sufficient to do the improvements, but I'm
it-
trying to figure out what the question is can the city then go back and legally collect the money from the individual lot owners when the developer is the one that should be responsible for those costs? And I'm not talking the developer that owns the lots now, but the developer that built the development.
Yeah, I think we call it the predecessor developer or something like that. I think the idea, and David Wayne, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm jumping in, you would stop me, is that we are facilitating what the city would otherwise do by funding the capital to do the improvements to get the roads finished. And whether we bill ourselves and get, pass that through the city is a non-event, right? But, we're asking the city to during the building permit process, right, get a reimbursement for those improvements that were otherwise not done by the developer or previously funded by the city.
Yeah,
Because,
got
So-
that portion.
okay, so that, it's an important foundation to have, right? And that's part of the reason I tried to walk through it, because people didn't so when
Just
people
go
say,
ahead.
oh, you're doing it at the developer's expense, that's not true. We are doing it, okay, and putting the capital in, because the city doesn't legally have the capital in order to be able to finish those roads.
But can the capital that the city doesn't have, the developer's fronting, then be collected from the lot owners who, in theory, bought a finished lot?
That's what we'll have
And
to.
the bond should have covered.
That's why the
That's the
language
bridge
is the
we'll
way
have
it
to
is.
cross as we get into the.
The only
Legal aspects.
point at which we might be able to is when a permit gets issued. That's the only one we could think of, and even that, we have to then go to our attorneys and say, so can we do this, yes or no?
So what you're saying is if you can find a way legally to do it down the road,
We will,
and then you would reimburse that.
the city's.
They understand it's a little bit of a long shot, you understand it, but if by any means you can, then that would be,
And that's kind of where he's going. If they put up all the capital, but then the city finds out they can't collect reimbursement from the lot
is the
owners.
developer okay with that?
Is the developer okay with that? Because now they're on the hook for the capital
That's right, that's.
without a
the agreement.
guarantee.
That's correct. The other
So as long as
thing,
both parties go into it with eyes wide open, then.
the other thing, I think, Ted, is that there's not a prohibition from us as the developer going in and finishing the road and doing other things and requesting the homeowner that currently exists there to say, hey, we're gonna go finish the rock line ditch. You finished it on one part of your house. Are you willing to, participate in us finishing the rest of it?
No, not really.
Okay, but no, and that's okay.
Because I don't want to make a bill there.
He's not one of your lot owners.
No, well,
No, but he
frankly, I
is.
think he is.
I actually
Yes,
am.
okay.
We're talking
So-
about flat D.
So then the point is that as long as we follow city standards, it's gonna look how we want it to look.
Which is, and
So-
that's why I got so deep into this, is because
You're talking
that's
about-
exactly what I got. I
Yeah,
finished the
yeah.
rock line ditch on one side, but I have them on the other side, because I want to
All right, all
corner.
right.
So if the developer comes in and finishes that, now am I on the hook to pay
Gotcha.
the city to reimburse the developer for that rock line?
And then it goes back to the question of who was truly responsible for putting the rock line ditch? Was it the developer, or is it the homeowner? Is that part of a finished lot, or is it not part of a finished lot?
Yeah, and from what I understood from the city, the rock line ditch is from the developer, but,
Yeah.
because I was promised I'd be grandfathered in, but that's the other.
Yeah, so
That
that's,
was a previous,
but can you, if you can
Maybe
unmute, please
And then-
make sure that that's your understanding also, and make sure I'm not misrepresenting something.
I don't know if he can unmute or not.
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see,
That's the question.
Oh, there you go.
I don't see anything different than what you were explaining, Steve.
Because then I had a part two to that, because at one time there was a discussion about those costs in exchange for the city giving part of public improved facilities to the
Go
developer.
back to your spreadsheet that Wayne had sent to us a while ago, as far as
Yeah.
the pros and cons and costs and all that.
So is that also, because that's where I was actually originally going with this discussion on the agreement, is that, because I didn't see that in the agreement, that in exchange for those costs, the city is then giving, I mean, to talk specifically, the lower half of Eagle Nest and to the developer.
That's in there, Ted.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering.
It refers
Unless I
to
missed that.
it refers to an exhibit. It's in section 6 where it talks about conveyances of land. So that it's 6.1 if you
Is that
want.
one where it refers to exhibit?
It's
Is it A or
It's
is it one?
exhibit E.
Oh. Okay.
And then there's also just in that same section, there's an easement that we're giving to the city across the piece that we've got up on the upper part up here for a trail in that same section.
So then, I'm sorry to get so deep into this.
It's all right.
I read it, but it's,
No.
I'm on COVID brain recovery, so things are
I wish I could use that
fogged
excuse.
up.
I
Yeah, I
just-
can't even, I'm using that excuse for as long as I can use it, right? This may be a few years I'll use this it's just really age, but, so in the case, in the event that say, that happens, the improvements, and capital costs for the improvements are covered by the developer, and the public portions of the street are then exchanged to the developer, is the city then still gonna collect in money from the individual lot owners to reimburse the developer? So then,
Well, only if we can.
in order, would it be only up to the value of those improvements that are being exchanged?
There's a cap on each one. It's allocated by lot, right? So,
Okay. Other questions that any have?
Wayne, I apologize for kind of going
No,
back
no,
and
that's
forth,
fine.
but
That's fine.
I know that's not normal course, but I thought it might help. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it did.
and David, correct me if
Helpful discussion.
the understanding is incorrect, so,
No, we spent about, what, an hour and a half on that,
yeah.
in just discussions on that particular point. And that was one where I felt like Summit Creek had to give a little, you know, and there were other places where I felt like Woodland Hills had to give a little, and, you know, this is what I told the council last night, is, you know, this was a give and take. I feel like we came to a good spot, but it definitely wasn't all Woodland Hills or all Summit Creek. It was a meeting in the middle.
From a legal standpoint, our attorneys have looked at this, as has Summit Creek's attorneys,
Everybody's okay.
and they're fine with the legalese, legal language. Realize that, you know, there's some things that legally we have to pursue further to look into to see if it can be done. But as far as the way it's presented in the development agreement, all legal on both sides are fine.
And if I understood that right, one question, there will be a preliminary plat approval, which will include the entire developed area, and then that will be broken down into phases for final plats.
Correct.
Which is pretty common.
Yeah. The project area, as they define it,
Project
the
area.
master concept plan. And they've been working on that for a while, also getting ready for this agreement to be ratified or approved, and then, so shortly thereafter, we'll likely be receiving a preliminary plat.
Yeah, I'm sure they're working on that.
Could you move the gate just right up there on Coo Run, like 1.5 block?
Would you like it there?
No. Well, I would, but I don't wanna pay the, well, never mind, that's a whole private thing. Anything to stop the traffic that goes down all night long down that circle, I'm in favor of.
Actually, I think that will
Yeah.
happen naturally, once the gate
Once
goes
they
up.
figure it out, yeah.
Once the gate goes up, it's not gonna be nearly the traffic that it is, and certainly not the clientele.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing you haven't heard yet is we wanna come in front of the planning commission with a spike strip for people that don't, you know, have the right, you know, car and they leave at 10 o'clock at night.
I'm on board with that, especially.
That's all a joke, that's just so you know, that's all a
Spike
joke.
strip and a
Well-
machine gun.
You don't know how many times I've thought about that, only mine's just a homemade one with nails, but especially when I watch those teenagers at 10 o'clock at night till you hear them by 3 in the morning, and they are doing probably 50, 60 miles an hour down that road. Most of them, I would say. A few times I've wanted to go out there with my spike strip and throw it.
Have to do that when they're drunk.
Yeah, I've watched 2 of them race up that road, probably doing 80 one night. Teenagers, side by side
Need it.
racing.
A strobe light out there on a sign that says camera in action or something like that. Make people think that their license plate's gonna be captured on a camera.
You know,
There was a license plate camera out there, and it got kicked out.
if that's an issue, we probably need to have you talk to Ben, because we have security up there all the time.
Yeah, they used to come down our circle all the time, but they don't anymore.
And so that's something we probably ought to, you know.
I got it last year, I got to know really well that that security guard we had. We have to be friends. We bring him cookies sometimes at night.
Wake him up.
Yeah, well, he'd be sitting off in his car hiding in the trees down there at the bottom of Eagle Nest, which was kind of fun, you know, because then they drive down there and park and he'd flip his lights on, you know, watch the teenagers. I mean, it's gonna ruin my date night, because that's half of what me and my wife do is put our lights on and drive that circle after we start. Just watch everybody scramble. Or if they go down to the bottom of Cougar Lane, I can walk down around Bear Hollow, it's unfinished, and there's a trail that comes out of sewer easement. And it hits right on the bottom of Cougar Lane, and they can't see it until you pop right out on the road. And I'll pop right out on the road, and you just watch them go dive down in their cars and stuff. It's half my entertainment anymore.
So we're gonna have to get you like a DVD player or something, right?
Yeah.
Get you a subscription to
Get,
Netflix.
get him a set of Legos.
Yeah, it's.
Because he doesn't build enough all day.
If it weren't for all the fast drivers, it wouldn't be so bad, but there's a lot of traffic.
No, but
And they.
seriously, we need to get you in touch with Ben, so that Ben can coordinate some of that with the security.
Strider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you looking for a motion
Yeah,
on
if
this?
there's nothing other, any comments?
Sorry.
And if you have, I'll take a motion. Yep.
I made one tonight, I'll make it again, I thought somebody else would jump on it.
I thought Larry, I looked at Larry, and it looked like he was getting ready to, so I was kinda holding for a second. Are we recommending approval or recommending
Whatever your motion wants to.
to the city council?
It's either it's a recommendation to city council for or against.
I'll see if I can make it a motion. Move that we recommend the development agreement to the city council for approval.
I'll second it.
Okay?
I think there's been a lot of good work done on it, I know it's been looked at by attorneys and back and forth, I think it's ready.
Throw the game up pretty good.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Very well.
It's all yours, Dave.
Board deck is.
It's been mine for a while.
I know, but it's now all yours.
It's been mine, Steve's, Bucky's, Ben's, Wayne's.
Yep.
Jody's been in on a little bit.
Okay, next item on the agenda is hazard assessment study. What this is,
Are we redoing that hazard study, or is that being re-identified?
no, this is the issue with
Well, thank you, I appreciate your help.
natural hazard study. We've looked at it, the city has, and when it was, here it is. Yeah, okay, you got it.
This is right?
Yep, yeah. We want to change this, because right now, every single lot this is required.
Period.
Every single lot,
End of discussion.
whether there's a hazard on or not. And so, as we've got looking at it, and this can cost several thousands of dollars.
It does.
We get a set of maps from a civil engineer, geotechnical engineer, that indicate where the hazards are in the city. Now, that can change from time to time, they base their maps on a lot of things. But what we'd like to do is use their maps then as an area for where a hazardous study is required. So where we have a lot that's not in that area,
They don't have to do
then
it.
they don't have to do a hazard study. So it's guided by the maps. that we
Which
get.
is evolving over time.
It is. Every year, generally, we'll get a new set of maps. So they might change from year to year. But we feel it's more fair to the homeowner or the lot owner. So the wording would be just a little bit of change from our existing wording. It says a natural hazard study shall be required for every application for occupied structures and habitable spaces where the lot, this is the change, where the lot on which the structure will be located has been identified as an area that may be susceptible to a natural hazard.
Do we reference that data? In other words, as by FEMA or as by XYZ, you know, or if there's multiple references, whatever those
There
references
isn't one,
are.
it's just the maps,
Yeah,
but we.
because here it's just saying it may be
The
susceptible to a
reference
natural
as
hazard.
indicated in IGS maps
Yes,
or
yeah.
other maps that identify hazardous areas.
What we could do, Wayne, is we could call it a citywide hazard map. So what we did is we took all that hazard data that Geostrata put together, and they sent us their files, and we brought them all into one citywide map. So you can look on one map and you can see every hazard area, no matter what it is, whether it's a landslide, a flood.
So as identified by XYZ map, or.
So it's just one map, and we can say.
There is one
we can call
specific
it-
map then, and that's
I
all.
was just gonna pull that up right now. We actually did that last week. We had Geostrata send over what they call their shape files, which is a file structure you can bring into GIS. And we brought it in because we have a citywide map that we,
Yeah, this is something that we've asked Jones and Mill to be working on with us.
Yeah, whatever it is, I would just reference it.
So, good point.
so then they've got just one.
So as you can get a lot more coming in and saying, well, I have this resource and it says this isn't a problem, and then you're gonna say, well, we have this and it says it is, and then you end up with some of this, so.
Yeah.
So where is this located in the,
There's
Is
the
it
map
in
right
code?
there.
That's ten, that's ten.
Yeah, it's in there somewhere.
Okay.
And so you see
It's
got-
entitled. Let's see, it's in. It's entitled 12 or 13. I can't remember which. Or title, excuse me. It's Title 11, Chapter 9.
and is that section talking about,
It's titled Natural Hazard and Flood Hazard Study.
okay,
So the first paragraph or so of it is what we're changing. We're not changing anything else. There's a lot of criteria that that chapter sets up as to who's qualified to do this study. The engineer has to have certain qualifications, and a lot of things. We're not changing any of the requirements, only whether the study is to be done.
You're just saying, if it's required, it's required, if it's not, it's not. Instead of, it was always required.
Yes.
So will you send me the link?
Yeah, can you send that map to everybody? This is part, we had Jones and DeMille to do a new city map, like this one behind, but more. A number of years ago, we had one done that showed the individual lots throughout the whole city. And it was emergency, showed where emergency routes are and so forth in the city.
I'm trying to redo that one.
And we really like that, and so we asked Jones and Mill to update it, which they've done. It shows individual lots throughout the whole city, updated it with the new plats that have been approved. And then this overview map where the hazard is, has been overlaid that map. So you can see by lot, which lot is in a hazard area, which lot is not.
is fire a natural hazard?
It is.
So are there any lots? in
Well,
there?
it's, let me retract that. It's more flood, earthquake, avalanche, yeah,
Yeah, fire's
fire's not,
included in this one,
not the natural hazard.
because it's not,
Not natural,
and it doesn't, yeah,
it's just nasty.
it's not an existing
Like-
natural hazard, like a fault line, right? It's got a fault lines on here,
Okay.
and fault line buffers, because that's an existing natural hazard. Where a fire's not, it's got flood zones, it shows rock slide zones, a bunch of stuff in there. Again,
Are most of those around the periphery of the city or?
it's got avalanche,
Yeah, earthquakes could be anywhere.
Yeah,
flooding,
Flood could
landslides.
be anywhere, but
whirlpools.
avalanche, more peripheral.
But again, this only applies to new applications for building, correct?
Correct.
The rest of us, we're just stuck with whatever happens anyway.
Yeah.
What's your email, Larry? I have a number.
Larry and Judith Marie,
Wow. Larry and
A&D, yep,
Judith
Judith
Marie.
Marie @gmail.
So, to make it shorter, would it be bad to say a natural hazard study is not required on lots that have not been identified as areas susceptible to a natural hazard?
I tend to think more required.
Yeah,
Or do you need to
think
say
the
that it is
emphasis one.
required?
I would say it's required except, instead of saying not required except. Yeah, I would say required, if it's been identified, it's required.
So it's just a really long sentence.
It's almost as long as Larry's email.
Yeah. I think it's okay.
Used to be.
If you just add that reference there, Wayne, of, whatever you're using for the.
Yeah, the map.
The map, yeah.
I think we'll
Yeah,
likely have to
simple.
have this part of a public hearing,
Yeah,
so come probably next month, we'll put that on the list.
okay.
And you commented, put it as that it's shown on the hazard map.
You'll add some verbiage there, but references, whatever you're using.
Yeah, our second son is an accountant, works at the sheriff's office. And he's doing 2 days a week now.
Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is, the little shipping containers. We've talked to our attorney about the proposal, and I've sent you, this is a draft that our attorney did. And he is fine with this fee, as long as it, we make it understood that it's a performance fee. And he feels comfortable with us being able to use it in the way that we're proposing. So if things are not done properly, then we can use that to get rid of the container. So the red part is what, he's taken our accessory building ordinance and done some changes to it here and there. So.
So are we talking about shipping containers or accessory?
I'm sorry. Oh.
Because there's two different, one's 2C, one's 2D.
Well, it's accessory building.
Because you're talking about shipping containers and saying the red part, there's just saying the red part, it's the entire page.
There's two different parts of our ordinance that need to be changed. So, one is the accessory building, because we're now including,
Shipping containers.
the shipping containers and trailers to be part of shipping, to be part of accessory buildings. And the other part is addressing specifically then the semi-trailers as accessory buildings and shipping containers.
Okay, so on the first one on A, where it says no detached accessory building shall be located closer than 20 feet to any building, is that because if it is closer, then it's considered part of the?
It has to have fire sprinklers and other things. This is just saying you can't do it. It has to be 20 feet.
I thought you
Yeah.
could build closer and then it was considered part of your house.
If it's up to 12 feet or closer, it's part of your house. It has to, excuse me, if it's 12 feet or closer, it has to follow
All the
all
houses.
the house building code.
Not accessory
standards.
building. This is exciting,
But accessory buildings within 20 feet have to follow the same
Requirements.
requirements as, I'm getting confused.
If it's within 20 feet.
I
it
think
has
the
to
20
follow
foot
your
is a
home.
fire, Is the
Within 20 feet, it has to follow
Does it
the
have to be
fire
sprinkled
code,
and all that
all
kind of stuff?
building code, everything
Yeah,
is the original structure.
if it's 12 feet or closer, then it's
Considered part of
follows all
that.
building, whatever the building code.
And if somebody added on, like my house doesn't have sprinklers.
Whoa, did you get lost?
Dude, what's up?
Built it
You
in
did get lost.
closer, would I have to like put sprinklers throughout my house and bring it up to the current code?
What's going on?
Not for the house in and of itself. If there's some factor though that requires, depending on how much remodeling you're doing.
Yes.
then the
Once you
house-
get a certain percentage remodeling, then the entire structure has to be brought up to the current code. And I don't know if it's 50%, once you do a certain percentage, everything has to be brought up to current code, so just don't cross that line.
Your I-15 exit was about 3 hours back, 3.5 hours back.
He
You
saw
fall
Val
asleep
out in
at
his
the
car,
wheel?
wanted to say hi to Val, so sorry.
Val's out chipping. I bet give him a call, he'd love to have you.
Do you know where he is?
They were over on Autumn Leaf. Hey, how you doing, buddy? You liking it down there? You sure? Alright. Yeah, he was on some circle called Autumn Leaf.
I can't remember what that one is.
Yeah, you
There's
do.
a lot of stuff over there.
Yeah, all the vegetation there that was taken out of the house that sold, yeah, that's where they're at chipping.
They clear cut that place.
We've had a public hearing on this already, we'll spend time, but I don't know that there's a need to have another one, I'll talk to Jody and see. But this is how the ordinance would go forward. And again, this is been crafted by our attorney,
Hey, did you ever find funding for your business?
so.
I also agree with you, because they have to be visual.
Yeah, so that one makes sense to me there. You want these addressed separately,
No, we'll do it together,
just as a package?
yeah.
So looking at shipping containers. Let it be public record, I am not a fan of the semi-trailer option, I'm just telling you for the 20th time.
Yeah, no, actually, kind of not.
Probably.
Nor even shipping containers.
Yeah.
If I were to take a,
It's interesting, is we're allowing these to be placed on solid foundation, right, including concrete or gravel base. But if you park a trailer next to your house, it has to be on a solid surface, which is asphalt or concrete. So like, if you have just a regular utility trailer, at least from what I understood from our code, it has to be parked behind the setback and it has to be on solid surface. It can't be gravel.
Huh.
That's what I was told when I had to do my trailer
somewhere in here, I thought that, oh yeah, D, that says when accessory building is located on a corner lot, that's, the side setback will be the same as the front setback, 30 or 50 feet. Somewhere, I had the question, my thought was, we shouldn't allow any accessory building to be in front of the main structure. In other words, it had to be back 30 feet or 50 feet, depending upon the front setback.
Well, here it says accessory building shall not be erected in any required setbacks.
Okay, that's covered,
That
that's.
would cover your front
that's right.
setback, yeah. It could still be plain at the front of the house, but
Yeah.
can't go in front.
Can't go in front of it. Yeah, thank you. Lori, item G there on the all accessory buildings, it kind of clarifies that.
Yeah,
12
it
foot.
does.
We talked about needing to tweak our building permit for these to make sure that that $1,000 is clear in there as to what it can be used for.
Yeah.
So that's something that the city would do. This is passed.
Okay, are we good on this?
towards that, but they can't get it done in 6 months, can they apply for an extension?
Yep.
But it's not listed, right?
Let's see, any approved site plan or building permit, an accessory building shall expire 6 months after its initial issuance. Within the 6 months, the accessory building shall be placed on a lot with the required approved additions completed and final inspection approved. If the party does not comply with this section, any fine or other remedial action may be taken as provided in 1011(2)D. So to be truthful with that, Michelle, what I think you said. 10, 11.
Well, if all they need to do is put it on a gravel patch and keep the wheels on.
You gotta do more than that.
You gotta stick frame it, we gotta modify to give the appearance of a stick frame.
The appearance of a stick frame prefabricated or similar structure to the one already on the premises. Modification may include windows, outside furnitures, and other issues of the cause of structure to lose most of its original appearance. Any of these outside structural modifications shall be approved by the city's approved code regardless of the size of the type of this accessory.
So why does it have a gravel base? Why is that okay and not for a trailer with wheels?
The wheels have to come off.
Yeah, but if you have
Or
a
if you park
camping
your
trailer
camp
or
trailer
something,
or a
it
utility
has to be
trailer,
on a solid surface, but
it
this
has to be on a
doesn't.
solid surface.
One, because the one's portable and one's not, I guess, I don't know.
Cause I had a trailer put at my house on a non-solid surface.
It's a travel trailer.
It was a four-wheeler trailer.
I would gather that the gravel is going to be used for permanent structure and therefore allowable,
Yeah.
rather than a temporary or something you're moving back and forth a lot. But 1011(2)D is a wrong site. I'm not, we'll have to see what. Oh, 2DG is the wrong one too. That's already been removed. Let me get some clarification on that. And item H. I think we don't have any other provision except the semi-trailer and the container to get rid of an accessory building if the permit is expired. If it was built without a permit, we can get rid of it with other ordinances that we have. And maybe that's what was intended here, they just used the wrong site. But in our accessory building ordinance by itself, I don't see any other, anything that would allow us to get rid of it for non-compliance. Do you wanna wait till we get that
Yeah, get it clarified.
clarification? Okay. Will do.
Because my motion would be to ban all containers and all semi-trailers except those already in existence and grandfathered in. So I could really simplify this. Do
Okay.
I have a second?
Clarification on that.
I don't ever plan on doing one, so I would.
Well, the ones we currently
Same
have.
fences, they all fences
2
on
years
the
ago.
side.
They have a couple of them. One came on without a permit. The other did come on with a permit before we had an ordinance.
Right.
So,
Were we one of those, Wayne?
no,
Okay.
you.
Do you have a shipping container?
It's their
It's
new
your
sales office.
Well, the sales office, that's more of a trailer, but that's a temporary structure. I mean, even if it's for years, it's still temporary, it's not a permanent. And we did go over and look, we can get the fire truck around it, sort of.
We drove around it, yeah, already.
We did, you didn't know that. but we
You
did.
need to
You
check
didn't see your air conditioner sitting on the ground for a
Yeah,
while.
that was before the AC went on, so,
It's gonna get taken
so the
off.
AC may come off, then we go by, but hey, other than that, we're good.
Anything else, miscellaneous that? Need to bring up or have questions about? If not, I'll take a motion.
Oh, Wayne, before you do that.
Sure.
Just one thing, so, I know some of you, are like Lori, I know you knew, Ted, you've been hearing about us for a long time, right? So, but if you have questions about what we're doing in the development, reach out to Ben, reach out to myself, reach out to Buck. We're glad to meet with you and just give you a deeper dive than what you get in the meetings and having a bunch of documents thrown at you, if you'd like that. So we're glad to educate, I think is part of it, because I think the best thing you guys can do is make the right decision, right? But an uninformed decision, whether you think it's right or not, it may be the wrong decision. So we're glad to always educate on that.
Yeah, some of my concerns, I mean, this, and, you know, I was concerned about the Eagle Nest conversion, but Ted, who lives there, is all for it, and he's presented the pros to me, as far as, you know, maybe eliminating some of the behavior that takes place down at the end there, which makes sense to me. So that's already been addressed, we've had dialogues on this for months.
Although I'd like, delaying it as long as possible.
Yeah, so anyway, you know, and then the gates.
I told you
think
about my
you're-
wife's idea.
Ted, I think you're 4 years. So that's my thought.
Or,
Or more, depending on what happens with interest rates.
Yeah, the market.
when the market crashes, come and talk to me about one of your lots.
Well, dibs on it, we, well,
It's too high price for me right now, but eventually, if it ever crashes, and
Or if inflation is so great that, you get twice as much money in the
So-
same price.
my wife's idea is to take a big sign and stick on our front lawn that says sex offender lives here. Keep people away.
Yeah, make sure he doesn't get to that, okay?
you never know, we might launch a hostel as a commercial activity next door.
We own a piece of property down in Carbon County, and for years.
You should
uh,
probably adjourn first.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear the Carbon County story.
Who seconded that?
Yeah,
Ted, you seconded it?
Yeah.
all in favor, there you go.
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye. Am I okay to turn it off?
Yeah. Turn it on.
I just didn't want you, whatever story you were
No,
gonna be, to be part of